One thing that taxonomy projects highlight really quickly is how siloed organizations still are and how many organizations just don't have a strong handle on data governance. We're definitely getting a lot of attention right now, the taxonomists of the world, because of our role in trying to solve this problem of garbage in, garbage out.
Welcome to Real Story on MarTech. Ruthless advocates for your MarTech mission. Advising buyers with just the facts on stacks to get you on the right track.
Welcome back to the Real Story on MarTech. I'm Jarrod, Gingras, Managing Director of the Real Story Group.
And I'm Tony Byrne, founder of Real Story Group.
And today, Tony, we have, for the first time ever, a special guest. Stephanie Lemieux, founder of the consultancy Dovecot Studio, is joining us today. And just take you back to just 2 weeks ago, we had our Q1 Stack Leadership Council meeting. And for those of you new to the podcast, this is our regular meeting of leaders from some of the biggest brands in the world who convene in a vendor-free environment to discuss, all things MarTech, content, data. And in this past meeting, we invited Stephanie to share what she's seeing on the front lines of the taxonomy consulting world. And we thought that this was such an important conversation in today's day and age that we wanted Stephanie to come share her thoughts on that council meeting, some highlights and some more things that she's seeing with a broader audience. So we're going to hit on some of the highlights today in the podcast. So Stephanie, thank you for joining us once again and welcome.
My pleasure as always to hang out with you guys.
Awesome. Well, the topic of today's conversation is going to be taxonomies and the future of your MarTech stack.
Taxonomies, of course, Jarrod, everybody's favorite topic. This is where we talk about how they stuff animals, right? So you can mount them on the wall.
Yeah, so I started my career as an information architect over 25 years ago, and I think I've heard that joke probably hundreds of times. I can only imagine how many times someone like Stephanie has heard it.
Tell dad jokes.
I've heard it quite a few times. That's why I have this book. I don't know if you can see it behind me. It's called Crap Taxidermy. Someone thought that would be a fun gag gift for me. I don't
Look, she came prepared. This is amazing. Awesome. All right. Well, we're not going to get into taxidermy, but what we're going to do, as always, we're going to deliver the real story, which is going to be coming straight from our leading global expert, Stephanie, and as well as some of the themes that we heard from our corporate members in this past meeting and in ongoing conversations that we both have with our clients. So let's get into it.
Okay, Stephanie, it's always great to see you. Let's start with a question that's really burning on everyone's mind, and I'm sure throughout the industry, which is, just what is a Dovecot?
It is a domain name that was available in the early 2000s when I started this company. No, I'm just kidding. We did start the company in the early 2000s, and it was kind of in that era of hipster put a bird on it. So we were looking around for interesting names that could tie into the ideas that we were trying to espouse with our company name. And one of them, of course, a dovecot is a huge birdhouse that you would probably mostly see in Europe, in Scotland maybe, that has sometimes hundreds of little holes for pigeons or doves. And sometimes they're triangle shaped, so they look a bit like a hierarchy. But the philosophical idea behind it was that, as birds swoop in and come to nest, every bird has its place, just like every concept or every piece of content in a semantic structure might. And then we tacked on the studio to convey the idea that, well, to us, taxonomy is an art rather than just a technical requirement. So working with people and designing something that works for humans. But if you are in Scotland, it's also a lovely tapestry studio there.
That's awesome, Stephanie. Thanks. I don't know if I heard that whole history. Tony, there's so much more thought than the Real Story Group in that name. Huh? I was just kind of blunt and to the point, but I guess that's what we do. All right, history and joking aside, Stephanie, let's, as a jumping off point here, can you tell us what exactly a taxonomy is?
Yep, I have my elevator pitch perfectly refined at this point over the past almost 20 years. A taxonomy is just a fancy way for a standardized labeling and organizing structure for concepts, content, data, for whatever. We use it in the science world to organize animals, but in the information and management world, we organize ideas, we organize documents, we organize images. So the taxonomies goal is to do two things. One is control naming, so force everyone to sort of talk about what do we mean when we say a word. When we say car? Do we mean automobile? Do we mean train car? And what is the structure of those words and those concepts in our organization? So whether that's a flat list or things sit together in parent and child categories, what we're really doing is we're defining a semantic context for content and for people to understand the language of an organization. And there are a lot of other kind of bells and whistles that you can add to a taxonomy that make it richer than just saying this is a list of words or this is like a hierarchical structure of words. You can add things like synonyms. You can add additional metadata like codes or dates or notes about how things are changed over time. And then you can start adding relationships between things beyond just saying this is a child of this. You can say a product is related to a brand or a person is related to a company. And now you're really starting to build a rich semantic structure. If you talk to library science nerds, they might quibble and say, well, that's a thesaurus, or, this is a folksonomy, or this is an ontology. But ultimately, I think in the business world, we're all kind of referring to these things under the larger umbrella of taxonomy to mean sort of these semantic structures.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I often hear people get confused about when they talk about what is a taxonomy is what is the difference between taxonomy and metadata? That's a common issue. Metadata is really the data about a piece of content, and taxonomies are invoked by metadata. So you might have a metadata field that requires some kind of controlled or structured list that goes with it. So that would be the taxonomy. And there's often confusion with navigation versus taxonomy. So a taxonomy can be used to navigate a system or a website, but not all taxonomies are navigation, and not all navigations are taxonomies. So that line can be a little bit blurry. So, if you've worked in any kind of platform at your job, you have probably interacted with a taxonomy. And if you've bought anything online in the last 10 to 20 years, you have interacted with a taxonomy.
Yeah, so that raises kind of an interesting question, which is fundamentally, is there such a thing? Is there a universal notion of taxonomies, or can there be different kinds of taxonomies in a business context?
There are a lot of different kinds of taxonomies. There's different flavors of them depending on their use case, obviously. We just talked a little bit about navigation taxonomies. They have a fairly specific use case. They tend to be more focused on how people get from A to Z or from place A to place B in a website, whereas a product taxonomy is more focused on how do we list, itemize, and relate in a categorical structure the types of products that we have in an organization, regardless of whether you're on a website or a different kind of system. You also have financial taxonomies, which can be very different from product taxonomies. You can have even different versions of product taxonomies. You can have a product taxonomy that's focused on R&D or shipping. And you can have a product taxonomy that's focused on marketing for the customer-facing web. So the use case of what that taxonomy is going to do really changes the nature and style of the taxonomy, and they have different rules of design a lot of the time. They have different best practices, conventions. And you can also have different levels of complexity. You can have flat lists, you can have those complex structures with lots of relationships that I talked about and all that additional metadata. And I think this is probably what makes this concept of enterprise taxonomy, so doing taxonomy across multiple use cases, such a challenging one for organizations, because you're trying to marry all of these different use cases and different styles of taxonomies and saying, how can we do something that's consistent or harmonized across multiple platforms without messing up anyone's use case and forcing people to use language that's not intuitive for their work practice or for the context in which they're in? So thankfully, one of the nice things about taxonomies is because it does allow you to manage relationships between things and add alternative labels or add codes or add all kinds of richness, the taxonomy can actually help negotiate and track these differences and take multiple taxonomies and link them together and say, even though we're using different words in different systems for this idea, these are connected together and we can make that explicit to IT systems in a way that they can use that for things like integrations or transformation.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I like to talk about taxonomies as part of that glue that ties these systems together, right? And
Absolutely.
we have clients talking about integrations all the time, and they're thinking APIs, and it's like, oh yeah, that's part of the problem. That's not the whole thing. You need to make sure these systems are at least able to communicate in a similar language. It's also interesting because we see taxonomies showing up as critical in so many of the implementations that we advise on, and so I wanted to just quickly look at this through the lens of the three core pillars of MarTech as we define it here at Real Story Group: content, data, and decisioning. All right, so we've definitely seen, as you've already mentioned, taxonomies rise to the fore in the content world for a long time as part of like CMS implementations for better search and navigation, like you said, and those are basically findability type improvements. We've definitely seen taxonomies for a long time as an important concept in the customer data management world. And we're also seeing it too in the decisioning world, where you need really clear cross-platform labels if you're going to try to automate things. But the one area that really seems to prompt an enterprise to undertake a major taxonomy project is my favorite subject, and that's digital asset management or DAM platform implementation. So why is it so common that we see taxonomies and DAM interrelated?
That it's so interesting, that relationship. And I remember doing my first DAM implementation taxonomy project a long time ago now. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is just another platform like any other enterprise platform. And then over the following few years, DAM started becoming half of our project scope, right? We were just doing DAMs left and right all of a sudden. I was like, oh my God, is this just because it's a hot trend right now and it'll die off? But no, it's been consistent for the last, I'd say, almost 15 years now that DAMs are a very large proportion of the projects that we do. And why is that? Well, the obvious but maybe superficial answer is that multimedia is just kind of harder to search without words. Pictures and video don't have as much text for a classical search engine to work off of. So if you want your digital assets to be even remotely findable, you kind of need to have your metadata game on. And I think over time also a lot of these DAM vendors have moved away from folders and are using taxonomy and metadata to fuel a lot of their findability and other types of functionalities inside the platform. So
some, not all. Some vendors are moving.
True, some not all.
That. Some are stuck in the folder world.
That's true. Taxonomy becomes kind of a really core part of your functional design of a DAM. So if you're trying to do dynamic collections, if you're trying to do workflow, if you're trying to do all kinds of fun things within the DAM, you need to have a pretty robust metadata schema. DAMs also store content that are linked to areas of the business that are already very taxonomy and metadata heavy, such as products. A product-oriented organization will have entire systems that are devoted to maintaining product data. Campaigns, there's whole campaign management systems, so there's a lot of data in and around a campaign. Franchises, characters, shows if you're in media. So all of these corporate concepts or objects have themselves a bunch of metadata. And in order to make digital assets searchable, you kind of have to bring some of that metadata along with the ride. So if you want to search your product images by SKU or by brand or by color of the product, like all of this metadata exists and needs to get translated into your DAM information architecture. And I'd also say that part of the answer to the question is about integration, right? We were just talking about how core DAM is to the sort of MarTech ecosystem, and digital assets are part of all of the cool digital marketing initiatives that are going on and very hot these days, like, hyper-personalization, omni-channel, this and that. And all of that is relying on digital assets kind of flowing through that ecosystem and being kind of choreographed in a fairly sophisticated way. And the DAM is driving all of that. And so if you've got digital assets in your DAM that don't have the metadata and taxonomy that it needs to push that content to downstream platforms and make that orchestration work, then you're not going to really be able to make any of those capabilities easy or scalable.
That's a really great point about DAM and kind of your broader MarTech ecosystem. While we're talking about content, I can definitely relate. I think there were 2 Real Story Group-led content selection projects that I was involved with in the last 5 years, where it turns out, although nominally it was a technology selection project, it turns out in both cases, when we dug deeper, we had to tell the firm, look, you're not ready for this. First, number one, some of the things that you're presenting as technology problems are actually content problems. And secondly, to do what you want to do with your replacement, in one case CMS, another case was replacement DAM, to do the things you want to do with this more modern tool, you have to have your information architecture in order. You're just going to have the same problems all over again. So in one case, they actually deferred their selection project by 9 months. In another case, they deferred it by 15 months so that they could essentially implement a taxonomy and then realize, the benefits of a modernized system. So, that's a very clear case, I think, on the content side. At the same time, I think, Jarrod, you were talking about something important around the other kind of 2 pillars of the stack around data and decisioning, and everyone talks about, customer-centric digital, that we ought to organize our digital around what customers need. But if that's really the case, if you really, really care about that, Stephanie, don't you need taxonomies that span different platforms internally, like from data to content and different engagement environments, say email to WhatsApp to web to commerce, and earlier you talked about this, different environments might need different taxonomies. So, how do we span all of this if we really want to be customer centric?
It's not easy. I was working on a project recently. The goal was to do hyper-personalization at scale, which, of course, sounds very sexy. But under the hood is just really complicated to do because it is touching, 6 or 7 different platforms, including your CDP, including your digital asset management system, including your email management system, including the website. So all of these things have to be able to talk to each other and be part of that whole decisioning matrix of when do we show which piece of content to which target audience in which context. And if you want to do hyper-personalization, like how do we swap out the actual digital asset in this banner ad in real time based on what breed of dog someone has, How do we even make this possible? And so it was a 6-month project to just break down what kind of personalization do we need to do, what systems are going to be involved, what data do those systems have, and how aligned or not aligned are those systems currently from a data perspective. Just doing that audit and highlighting where all the discrepancies were and identifying whether a source of truth for a taxonomy of dog breeds or a taxonomy of character names or a taxonomy of audience types even existed in the organization was multiple months. Then you have to tack on to that multiple months to figure out, can we align? If so, where does that aligned version sit, right? That's the whole question of, can we force different systems to speak the same language? If so, are we messing something up upstream or downstream? So this isn't just a hyper-personalization project. These products are involved in other capabilities already, so we can't mess up the business as usual stuff. So one thing that taxonomy projects highlight really quickly is how siloed organizations still are and how many organizations just don't have a strong handle on data governance, right? There's very little shared data architecture across some of these applications. And as soon as you start thinking about digital transformation and trying to support some of these fancy digital marketing capabilities, you realize how unscalable what you're working on is going to be. So you can do your proof of concept, but then as soon as you try to make something operational, you're going to run into a whole host of problems. So the projects, the reason, that these dam projects kind of bring a lot of this up to the surface is that realization that the dam is a silo, the PIM is a silo, the CMS is a silo, and if we want to create a true omni-channel, customer experience, we have to start breaking down those silos and figuring out where and when we can harmonize things. And if we can't harmonize things, can we create a translation layer on top of that where we can say, all right, well, we have different audience categories or we have different versions of product category in our different systems, but we can put the connection between those versions somewhere that an integration can handle or that our decisioning application that's going to do our targeting is going to be able to access.
And I just wanted to call back to the council meeting that we had, a few weeks ago. I was encouraged by some of the case studies that we heard from the council members. We were talking about, there's people on the data side thinking about taxonomy. There's people on the content side thinking about taxonomy. And in the most advanced organizations that gave their case studies, they were talking to each other. What a novel concept. And, it's those organizations that are going to be the most successful with this, I'm sure. I think, you've raised a couple things already, Stephanie, about how the profile of DAM has been rising for the last 15 years. It's something that I've been talking about quite a bit for the last 15 years as well. And I think we're very much aligned there. But I think you'd also probably agree that the taxonomy, the interest in taxonomy right now has, I guess, over the last 15 years has kind of ebbed and flowed. It hasn't been as meteoric of a trajectory as maybe DAM, but it's hot right now. There's no question about that, right? So why is it? Why is it so hot in 2026?
As a taxonomist, I'm not mad about the fact that it's hot again. I remember being in library school and thinking, taxonomy is a bit niche. I'm not sure if I'll be able to translate this into a career. And then the e-commerce boom happened. And then all of a sudden I was a hot commodity, So taxonomy, I think, becomes sexy when it's supporting some kind of popular real world use case. So that first boom was the e-commerce boom. Everyone all of a sudden needed a product taxonomy and web navigation, and the whole sort of web information architecture revolution was happening at the same time. So taxonomy was catapulted out of library science and into the mainstream. The next big wave, I think, was the sort of DAM boom over that following sort of 10 years or so, and we're still in it, I think. Enterprise taxonomy has been, interestingly, fairly sexy again as well. It became popularized, I think, during the wave of the whole digital transformation. I don't know when exactly that started, but it became one of the reasons that we were getting hired for quite a while. So doing all these replatformings at the same time and building, a digital foundation for a lot of new capabilities seemed like the right time to be thinking about harmonizing metadata and language and kind of creating that shared semantic architecture. Now, of course, it's AI. Everyone wants to do AI and are rushing to implement proof of concepts or projects and are realizing, I think, relatively quickly that AI does an okay job at some use cases and does a fairly terrible job in other use cases where there isn't an existing data governance practice, where you have a lot of dirty data and you're just trying to slap AI on top of ungoverned, unstructured content. It's not magically fixing all of those projects and creating, a beautiful semantic structure on top of that. So we're definitely getting a lot of attention right now, the taxonomists of the world, because of our role in trying to solve this problem of garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, so Stephanie, let's dig into this whole thing around AI a little bit more. There's been a lot of articles swirling around LinkedIn about knowledge graphs, context layers, taxonomies, certainly. And it seems like some commentators, like especially AI pundits, they assume that we know what these things are and we know why a taxonomy is important. We know how to build a knowledge graph. But then when we talk with MarTech leaders, on the other hand, it seems like there's a lot of confusion. So what do you account for all of this?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is going on in the world of semantic technology. And, there's a lot of new buzzwords. Not new buzzwords. These things have existed for a long time, but I think they haven't been interesting to marketing people until recently. So I think if I had tried to ask anyone what a knowledge graph was 5 years ago, they would have looked at me with fairly blank stares. And now people are name dropping knowledge graphs in marketing meetings on a fairly regular basis, which is kind of stunning to me. I think, the value of semantic structures in AI projects is relatively easy to extrapolate, right? I've hopefully convinced everyone of how important taxonomies are in general for making things easier to find for humans, for streaming operational efficiency in marketing, again, for humans, in facilitating integrations and data flow across applications for a lot of these digital marketing use cases. So taxonomies and other semantic structures have already been part of the foundation for integrations and sort of intelligence writ large. And so speaking a common language and having all this good data design, management and governance processes, all of that has never really been a nice to have. And there are things that have always caused problems with system implementations, integrations, MarTech-wide initiatives. They've caused, regulatory problems, legal issues, brand reputation issues. So all of this has always been relatively mission critical, but for some reason, they're always an afterthought. People get halfway through a DAM project or halfway through an omni-channel project and like, oh, shoot, maybe we should hire a metadata specialist and figure out some of these issues. They're often kind of an unsexy topic to spend budget on, or something that gets impeded by these siloed operations. So because marketing is not part of the IT infrastructure, they don't get to spend money on data science, so there's a weird little turf war of who owns data design and data governance. So often just the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and marketing doesn't talk to IT and whatever. But now that AI is here, there's a really big upheaval happening in that world. And those two narratives are really competing for attention. So a lot of people point at AI and say, well, AI is just magically going to come and cover up all of our sins of the past in terms of data hygiene and make it so much easier for us to standardize. We can just let AI sort it all out. We don't need to build a taxonomy anymore because the LLM can just read and understand and classify everything on the fly. And we don't need clean data because AI can just normalize in real time and extrapolate or whatever and use the data as is to find patterns, which is a little crazy to me. And then other people are seeing all the problems that AI can cause by being left to its own devices with all this dirty data, creating hallucinations and predicting incorrectly or creating bias or making it hard for a business to even reproduce its own results. And they're concluding, I think more than ever now, that if there was a good time for data governance, today is the day. Taxonomy and metadata are going to provide that set of guardrails that really are necessary for helping AI understand, quote unquote, our content and be more accurate and meaningful with how it's using it. So
Yeah, guardrails and for agents, context. Agents need enormous
absolutely.
amounts of context, and it's got to come out of your taxonomy. So yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, you know which side of the coin I'm on. AI is 0% magical. It's going to amplify whatever amount of attention you've paid to the quality of your metadata and taxonomies already. So, any kind of investment in taxonomy and metadata is going to help support accuracy, predictability, and scalability, as we've been talking about so far, in all of these new capabilities. A lot of what taxonomy and metadata are doing are providing explicit semantics, right? So rather than letting your LLM just kind of interpret things how it wants to, it's creating a scaffold for how the AI takes and parses and interprets language. I worked with a paper manufacturer many years ago, and they have a lot of really funny words in paper manufacturing, including butt roll. And if you ask an AI, like, what's a butt roll, and you give it no further context, it will tell you all kinds of lovely things about bread and dancing, but it won't tell you about the ends of paper rolls. So you really do have to help these AI tools understand context, understand language, especially language that's bespoke or unique to your organization or your industry. The taxonomies and metadata are also providing a lot more explainability and trust in what AIs are spitting out in terms of answers. So if you're giving your AI content collection and you're saying, here's the framework in which I want you to understand this content, and then it can feed back to you how it made its decision if you question it, then you're much more able to explain, why was this content served up to this audience? Why was this prediction made? And that much more makes it possible to trust in the accuracy of an AI. It also helps a ton in training. So if you have well-tagged content that has very explicit metadata and taxonomies, you can reduce a lot of the inaccurate tagging. You can also reduce the noise in your search results. And you're also just so much more able to do a lot of that cross-platform intelligence. So, you know, how does this bring us back to what does a marketer need to know about all of the fancy options that there are around taxonomy and metadata in the context of AI? So I would say, if we take as our baseline that having good governed basic taxonomy and metadata as a step in the AI support direction, then you can start layering on top of that baseline more levels of sophistication to give your AI even more power. The first layer, I would say, is ontology. Ontology used to be a philosophy concept or for data computer science nerds only. Now, a lot more people are talking about ontology, and it sounds scary, but ontology is really just multiple taxonomies souped up and linked to each other. So you're taking a lot of taxonomies and you're putting them in a more formal model that are really defining what are the key concepts in our domain and the relationships between them, so that people and systems share the same understanding of how things fit together. So a campaign is a concept. A campaign targets an audience. So campaign to audience is linked, which is also a concept. They have their own taxonomies, but the ontology defines that relationship and can communicate that to an AI. A knowledge graph goes one step further, takes that model of concepts and relationships and actually populates data against it. So if I have my concept of campaigns, here are all my campaigns, my concept of audience, here are my audiences, and here are how all of those are actually linked together in a queryable database. And you multiply that by all the kinds of relationships that exist in your model. And now that graph can be queried by an AI, by any system, in order to come up with answers and facts in real time. If you've ever used one of those cards that pop up when you Google something, you often get them for actors or restaurants or movies. A lot of that is powered by a big graph, knowledge graph behind the scenes. And then I'd say the last sort of fancy version of semantic stuff that is hot right now in the AI world is the semantic layer. So that's taking all of these things, taxonomies, metadata, ontologies, and graphs, popping them into a shared, central, and standardized service that can be accessed by multiple applications, where you're feeding organizational data in, the semantic layer is doing its magic and transforming or interpreting, and then the AIs and the front-end applications can query that semantic layer instead of querying all of these databases directly. So all of this is just working together to create a big unified picture of what do we mean, what's the context, what is our data architecture, and how can we quickly get that in the most streamlined way to multiple applications. But, that's the big leagues.
This is awesome. I think one of the reasons AI is so scary to so many people, it's like this big blob of so much information, and it's like, what's going to actually get spit back at me when I ask it questions? And the words that you're using are guardrails, scaffolding, structure, graphs, putting some rules in place here. That's how we get control of this blob, right? Is we apply these guardrails and make some sense out of it. So I really like that. And then just calling back to previous episodes of this podcast, Tony and I have spoken a lot about the future of digital asset management, and we talk about this damn 3.0 world that you have to get to before you can even think about a 4.0 future, right? And everything that you're talking about is these building relationships between content, putting these structures in place. That's damn 3.0. You have to do that before you can be successful in the future. So great stuff. I'm thinking about taking this back to a concept that you've mentioned already, and I think it bears repeating, and that's something that comes up. We see it all the time in our work when we're proposing enterprise AI strategies for things like personalization or content supply chain. We often have to counsel our clients and say, look, you need to get your content house in order, you need to get your data house in order, or this just isn't even going to work, right? And so at some level, we see MarTech leaders, they know this, they're hearing something that isn't a surprise to them, but they're disappointed because, going back to what you said, they think kind of AI is this magic bullet. We're just going to sprinkle some AI on it, it's going to figure it all out. But what happens when you start a AI initiative and you don't have taxonomy in place? Are you seeing people like going down the path and coming back to you saying, uh-oh?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening right now. A lot of organizations have started their first wave of AI proof of concepts and have realized that they weren't able to meet their quality thresholds, right? So it's answering things incorrectly too often, or it's pulling up the wrong content, or it's giving incorrect answers. So they're looking for that next layer of how can we improve the quality, and how can we leverage the knowledge that we have internally to help the AI better understand our users and their context and the kinds of questions that they're answering. I hate the garbage in, garbage out cliche, but it's still true, right? Bad data really causes issues. So it's not just that you need to have a taxonomy in place, but you actually have to have it applied, and you actually have to have it applied well to content in order for it to support these initiatives. So I think you are often in the situation where you have to go back to first principles, and I think that feels, like you said, a bit disappointing to folks that want to get these projects off the ground and they want to do it quickly. There's that whole fail fast mentality, but some of this foundational work is a little boring and a little granular, right? So unfortunately, it's a requirement in order to be able to move forward. that project that I was mentioning earlier about the hyper-personalization, it feels like moving backwards to have to sit down and do an audit of 7 platforms and granularly analyze the metadata. But if you don't do that, then you don't understand what the AI is even looking at, and you can't explain why it's behaving the way that it is. So understanding your current state is going to help you understand the outputs of your AI even better.
Let's flip the narrative here a little bit. I guess, we talked a lot about the content and data quality, but one of the promises of AI that I hear about a lot is this desire to use AI to actually build taxonomies, right? And then using them to populate metadata automatically. So I'm curious from your perspective, how good are these algorithms these days? Like auto categorization, like creating base term sets versus auto classification, like auto tagging and that kind of thing.
It's hit or miss, like anything.
Yeah.
Some stuff it's fairly good at, and then some stuff it's kind of spectacularly bad at, and I'm just kind of wondering, why are we even trying this at all? From a taxonomy development perspective, it's definitely an interesting tool. Would I want it to automatically build taxonomies and just run with them? No, I definitely think there is absolutely still a fundamental role for subject matter experts in reviewing anything that comes out of an automatic taxonomy creation tool, especially if you're going to be using it to guide AI answers. If you're building an HR policy agent where people are asking policy questions and going to, bring a grievance if they get an incorrect answer, you don't want to be letting an AI invent a taxonomy and not fact checking it or not verifying it before you start organizing all of your policy clauses along those lines. So there's a lot of risk involved in just letting an AI do whatever it wants in many contexts. So from a development perspective, absolutely human in the loop is still very important. I was doing a project this year with a business school, and we asked an AI to come up with some top-level categories. And one of the key ones that it thought was a great idea was business management. And I was like, great, you've just described 99% of the content that this organization creates. So this is not adding any value whatsoever. So it has a hard time understanding context, and it has a hard time understanding granularity and relationships between things oftentimes. So from a development perspective, we often use it as a starting point. We use it to help us cluster things. We'll use it to crawl through a bunch of content items and propose terms and propose how things could fit together. But then we also spend a bunch of time massaging what comes out of that and then running it against other taxonomies or reviewing it with stakeholders. From a classification perspective, I think it's more interesting. It's doing a better job in classifying against pre-existing taxonomies. If you can give it a little bit of structure, a few rules here and then, it can get pretty accurate pretty quickly. And it's been something that has been worked on for years and years now, especially in the digital asset space. Every time you do a CAPTCHA and you're saying which thing has a traffic light, you've been helping train a lot of these image recognition algorithms. So it's relatively good on anything that is kind of general object or concept recognition. It's good at faces, number of people, text recognition in an image. Where it struggles more is, again, on anything that has a little bit of ambiguity or a little nuance or is a little philosophical or requires a bit of conceptual judgment. So trying to ask an AI, for example, to tag messaging frameworks or brand pillars or anything that has a bit of a squishy nature to it, it's just a little bit more challenging, and you need to provide a lot more training for those things and even review. So for anything that you have any kind of regulatory risk or legal risk, letting an AI auto-classify something will always bear a little bit more risk to use an organization. So again, that human in the loop can be a better approach in that case.
Stephanie, that's super cool. Now we're going to take a short break.
Did you know that 16 of the Fortune 20 enterprises have turned to Real Story Group over the years for MarTech advice, either to guide them through an important technology selection or to help them steer their stack in the right direction?
That's right, Jarrod. But our Real Story Group corporate members come in many sizes, including some really digitally focused mid-sized firms. The key thing that all these clients share is a desire to take their MarTech stack to the next level and a desire to take their professional careers to the next level. So if you want to explore that further, find us at realstorygroup.com.
Okay, we're back. Let's chat now a little bit about building and deploying taxonomies. Let's start by talking about technology, Stephanie. We talked about taxonomies coming back into vogue, getting more popular again. I'm seeing a spike in inquiries around taxonomy management tools or taxonomy management systems. When does an enterprise need a taxonomy management system? Is this a size thing, a complexity thing, or something else? What do you think where do you see this area of technology going?
I think it's a mix of factors, size, complexity level, governance requirements as well play into the decision of do we need a tool or not, as well as level of adoption across the organization. So if you're building a taxonomy for a single thing, probably don't need a tool for it. But if you're building a taxonomy that's going to sit across 17 platforms, you probably need a central place to manage that. So while we have a lot of clients that are making do with spreadsheets or co-opting Airtables to turn them into taxonomy management tools, you eventually hit a threshold at which you need to think about something a little bit more serious, especially if you're syndicating taxonomies across multiple applications. So taxonomy management tool is not a huge tech market. There's maybe 5 or 6 vendors. And they're all fairly similar. So it's not an area of huge divergence of, functionality. They all kind of do taxonomy modeling, term management, version control, API integrations. Some do fairly robust governance. Some of them have auto classification. Some of them come now with graph databases and lots of AI functionality. So I think it's really, what are you trying to do with your taxonomy? How big is it? And how much stuff do you need to connect it to? That really makes that determination of whether or not you need to start putting budget into this. Because these tools are not inexpensive. So you have to have enough of a use case for them. One thing that's interesting to note about this area of tech right now is, I think at this point, most of the taxonomy tools have been acquired in the last 3 years or so by AI vendors. So they're getting integrated into AI platforms, which kind of underpins this whole conversation that we've been having, which is that taxonomy is a core foundation to AI. And if this whole technology transformation is not, proving that out, the AI vendors even agree that taxonomy is a big deal and an important component. So they're incorporating these tools into their platforms. And it's going to be interesting to see how that continues to play out in the AI platform narrative, like what the role of the taxonomy management component is, and how they're going to take all of the people that are currently using taxonomy management tools in a more classic way and sort of upselling them into the rest of the AI platform. So I think, the question, do you need a tool or not? Do you have the budget? Do you have enough stuff to warrant putting in a taxonomy tool? Do you have something in-house that you can use? Like maybe you already have an MDM platform, or maybe you have an existing AI platform like Snowflake or whatever that you can kind of build a taxonomy tool inside it. So I never want the tool to be something that is a roadblock for starting a taxonomy project or thinking about doing taxonomy more in a more unified way across the organization, you can always figure out the tech. So think more about how you can support a taxonomy going forward, regardless of what platform you're using.
Yeah, you can always figure out the tech, and obviously we can help with that, and we'd love to chat at more detail there. But it seems to us over the years that when we talk with MarTech leaders, there's an even bigger issue here that they're asking around building or like expanding a taxonomy, and that's really around, I guess, what I call scope. Like, how big do you bite off at one time or over time, and on what schedule, and like, what are the trade-offs here?
That's a great question, and I think something that a lot of our clients struggle with as well. Part of the reason that I think we often get invoked as part of a fairly specific platform implementation like a DAM is that it's a lot easier to tackle things from a platform perspective. That's often what people have control over, right? I'm a MarTech leader and I'm the business owner for the DAM platform and maybe the CRM or maybe some third thing. And this is what I can control. So I would like to do a taxonomy project that spans my domain of influence. And that's not a bad way of doing it. It's a great way of getting your foot in the door. It's a great way of determining what's ripe for being addressed as part of that initiative. I worked with a pharmaceutical client recently that was implementing a DAM, and they already had a couple of medical regulatory review systems in-house. They had a CRM, they have a R&D database, and none of those things talked the same language. And we took the DAM project as an opportunity to try to start tackling some of those enterprise problems, really using the DAM as the starting point. The other way that you can try to do it is to not take a platform perspective and look at things from that enterprise layer, but pick some battles, not try to boil the whole data ocean at once, because that absolutely would be overwhelming. Thinking about our hyper-personalization example that I keep coming back to, if I look at all of the metadata across 7 applications, I'm going to be looking at, hundreds of fields. But if I'm focused on what are the things I need to personalize, maybe that's 14 things, or maybe that's 30 things, which is a lot more manageable. So doing a quick audit and figuring out what use case am I trying to focus on, and what am I able to influence at the enterprise level, is another way of coming at it more from a top-down perspective. We worked with Sesame Street recently, and they were doing this great project of sort of digital transformation. And their goal was, let's audit all of our enterprise applications and look at where can we do a better job of taxonomy and start unifying things. And that resulted in us being able to start centralizing character lists and show names and educational goals and defining those things at the enterprise layer, and then starting to figure out a roadmap of how will we implement those things across multiple applications. So think about it from a sort of tipping point or catalyst perspective. What's that catalyst that's going to get the ball rolling around taxonomy and metadata? How can we take, again, that sphere of influence and do something that's meaningful and will move the needle on a specific project, a specific use case, a specific platform? And, that whole cliche, if you build it, they will come. I've seen that prove out to be true in so many cases. We start with, a taxonomy for the DAM, and then it turns out to be the taxonomy for 3 or 4 apps. And then it turns into a much larger data governance initiative. So start with what you can affect, and then see how it snowballs from there.
All right. So in building out this field of dreams of the future, I have to ask, who's doing this work? What should be insourced? What should be outsourced? When should someone call a firm like Dovecot? Or when should they try to do it themselves? Or what kind of internal capacity should we be building up in our enterprises? What are your thoughts there?
No matter whether you outsource or not, there should always be someone internally that's following on these projects to ensure that you're not, of course, losing any kind of institutional knowledge. So even if you do end up bringing outside people in, you still have to figure out who internally is going to be managing this work going forward, because taxonomies are too often seen as a one-time lift when really they're something that require care and feeding over time. So regardless of who builds the thing, you're still going to have to maintain it. So there's going to be a role for both internal and external parties throughout the whole thing. Using a consultant often is an interesting idea if you don't have a ton of internal resources and it's too big of a one-time lift to get something started. When you think about the amount of auditing or analysis or even negotiation that you might need to do across different departments and applications. So that's usually the main reason that we get brought into a project, is to just get that first round of something done. And then once something is up and running, it's a lot easier for an organization to maintain and enhance over time.
Yeah, Stephanie, you mentioned, kind of internal staff. We've just got 2 minutes left. So I want to just have you do a little bit of future gazing here. And it's about roles. So what are some emerging enterprise information architecture roles that may not even exist yet, but you think probably should exist soon, if not already, as we move into this era of AI? Like, what are some roles that MarTech leaders should be at least thinking about?
I think MarTech leaders are more and more being put into a position where they have to be champions for data quality. Today's marketing leader has to have more than just a digital marketing vision, but they have to care about how they're going to orchestrate content and data across that ecosystem. So they have to start wearing a data governance hat. And so much in the past, this has been an IT function. Now, I think it's much more becoming something that platform business owners need to care about. There needs to be marketing master data subject matter experts. So rather than just being, again, an IT function to do master data, marketing has its own little universe of master data. So we need to have much more subject matter expertise in that sphere as well. And there has to be more taxonomists in-house. I think that's something that a lot of organizations struggle to justify or have been reluctant to add a position. But the more you're doing taxonomy at scale for things like hyper-personalization or for AI, the more you need someone sort of minding the shop.
We've been talking about the need for marketing data operations that are part of the marketing team rather than the data team. And I think by an extension of that is sort of what you're talking about, which is marketing master data management and then a taxonomist to put it all together. So awesome. Thanks as always, Stephanie. Very enlightening conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I feel like we could talk about this for days and days, let alone an hour on a podcast. So we appreciate all the insight. And with that, I will just suggest to all of our listeners, if you need help with your taxonomy, feel free to reach out to Stephanie and the Dovecot team directly, or reach out to us and we'll make a connection. I'll also remind you that here at Real Story Group, Tony and me and the rest of the team, we can help you craft that business-focused AI and agentic strategy, your DAM strategy, your content strategy, or any of the like, with the right use cases and the right tools to help you get real results. So again, just reach out to us if you need some assistance along the way.
That's right, Jarrod. You might think of RSG as kind of a human co-pilot as you fly this bumpy MarTech plane. But Jarrod, what's on tap for next month's podcast?
Yeah, next month we're going to dive into the data piece that we kind of touched on today, and we're going to talk about the future of customer data technology, because it has an interesting future, I think. There's a lot of moving parts here. So be sure to stop back for that one, and we encourage everyone to just hit the subscribe button to get alerted when it drops. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, share with your friends, do all the podcast things that you all know and love to do. And as always, we thank you all for spending some time with us, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Tony. And we'll onward and upward.
Bye now.